In the bitter cold of the Colorado Rockies, winter of 1885, a woman's desperate cry echoed through the snowbound passes as she fled under cover of night. By morning, the prestigious Henderson Ranch stood in flames, its powerful owner vowing revenge against the woman who carried his brother's unborn child. Eleanor Collins had vanished into the wilderness with nothing but the clothes on her back and a fierce determination to protect her unborn baby, a child that powerful men would kill to ensure was never born. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The howling wind cut through Eleanor's woolen coat as she trudged deeper into the mountain forest. 3 days had passed since her desperate escape from Henderson Ranch, where she'd worked as a housekeeper for the past year. The distant smoke from the burning ranch house had long since faded, but the terror of that night remained fresh in her mind. Charles Henderson, one of the wealthiest cattle barons in the territory, had discovered her secret. She was carrying his late brother William's child, a pregnancy she'd managed to conceal beneath layers of clothing and careful movements for nearly 7 months. William's bastard will never inherit a cent of Henderson money, Charles had snarled that night, his face twisted with rage as he cornered her in the kitchen. I'll see to that personally. Eleanor had fled through the servants' entrance while the ranch hands were distracted by Charles's shouted orders to find her. The man's influence stretched across 3 counties. Nowhere in civilization would be safe for her or her child. So she had made the impossible choice: the wild mountains in winter rather than certain death at the hands of a man whose fortune had bought him both power and impunity. Now, as the early morning light filtered through the dense pine forest, Eleanor paused to catch her breath, one hand resting protectively on her swollen belly. The baby kicked vigorously, as if protesting the cold and their dire circumstances. "I know, little one," she whispered, her breath forming clouds in the freezing air. "We'll find shelter soon, I promise." Eleanor had grown up in a mining town on the edge of these mountains. Her father, before his death in a mine collapse, had taught her the basics of wilderness survival during their occasional hunting trips. Those lessons, half forgotten until necessity revived them, had kept her alive these past days. She'd managed to start fires each night, find water despite the freezing temperatures, and even set rudimentary snares that had caught a small rabbit the previous evening. The sound of running water drew her attention. Following it through a rocky passage between towering pines, Eleanor discovered a narrow stream that hadn't completely frozen over. She knelt carefully, her movements awkward with pregnancy, and drank deeply from the icy water. As she straightened, a movement across the stream caught her eye, a deer watching her warily before bounding away. "Where you go, I'll follow," Eleanor murmured, reasoning that the deer would know where food could be found. She crossed the stream carefully on slippery stones and followed the deer's tracks through increasingly rocky terrain. The forest began to thin as the ground sloped upward. By midday, she was climbing a steep incline, her breath coming in painful gasps as the altitude and her condition made each step a struggle. Just as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her, the deer's trail led her on a rocky outcropping. And there it was, a dark opening in the mountainside, partially hidden by overgrown brush and fallen rocks. A cave. Eleanor approached cautiously, aware that such shelters often housed mountain predators. She listened intently for any sounds from within, picked up a sturdy branch as a makeshift weapon, and slowly entered the cave's mouth. The interior was surprisingly deep, extending perhaps 30 feet into the mountain. Most importantly, it was empty of any current inhabitants, though old bones in one corner suggested it had once served as some animal's den. Not ideal, she told her unborn child, but better than freezing to death in the open. The cave's interior remained above freezing, not warm by any measure, but a marked improvement from the biting cold outside. A small opening in the cave ceiling allowed smoke to escape, which meant she could risk a fire without suffocating. This place, unwelcoming as it was, might just save their lives. Over the next 2 days, Eleanor transformed the barren cave into a rudimentary shelter. She gathered pine boughs to create a softer sleeping surface, collected firewood and stacked it along one wall, and used rocks to create a fire pit beneath the natural chimney. She even managed to set several snares in the forest below, which yielded 2 more rabbits and a grouse. On the 4th morning, Eleanor woke to the sound of snowfall outside the cave entrance, heavy, thick flakes that quickly began to accumulate. By midday, nearly a foot of fresh snow blanketed the landscape, effectively trapping her in the cave. The timing couldn't have been worse. She'd been planning to set more snares that day, as her food supplies were dwindling rapidly. As night fell and the snowfall continued unabated, Eleanor sat beside her small fire, carefully roasting the last strips of rabbit meat. The reality of her situation pressed down upon her like a physical weight. She was 7 months pregnant, alone in a mountain cave in the dead of winter, with dwindling supplies and a powerful enemy who would not stop searching for her. "We've come this far," she told her unborn child, forcing confidence into her voice. "We'll find a way through this too." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The blizzard lasted 3 days, during which Eleanor rationed her remaining food to mere mouthfuls. By the time the skies finally cleared, hunger had become a constant companion, a hollow ache that made her dizzy when she stood too quickly. As the morning sun reflected blindingly off the pristine snow, Eleanor ventured from the cave. For the first time since the storm began, the snow reached nearly to her knees, making movement exhausting, but necessity drove her forward. She needed food, and the snares she'd set before the storm were her best hope. The first 2 snares were empty, their mechanisms triggered, but whatever animal they'd caught had apparently escaped. The 3rd snare, however, held a large snowshoe hare, its white fur almost invisible against the snow. Eleanor felt a surge of gratitude as she retrieved the animal. "Thank you," she whispered, acknowledging the life that would sustain her own. As she turned back toward the cave, a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen. Eleanor gasped, dropping to one knee in the snow as she clutched her belly. The baby kicked vigorously, then another pain wrapped around her lower back. "No," she breathed, panic rising in her throat. "Not yet, it's too soon." She forced herself to breathe deeply, to remain calm. After several minutes, the pain subsided. A false contraction, perhaps, brought on by exertion and hunger. Still, the incident left her shaken. If the baby came now, here in this wilderness with no help, their chances of survival would be drastically reduced. Eleanor made her way back to the cave with renewed determination. She needed to improve their situation dramatically and quickly. The remaining weeks of her pregnancy, however many she had left, would be dedicated to creating a more sustainable life in this unlikely refuge. As the days passed, Eleanor's resourcefulness surprised even herself. She fashioned crude tools from sticks and stones, a knife of sorts from a sharp rock, snares from flexible green branches, a container from a hollowed piece of wood. She discovered a patch of wintergreen growing in a sunny clearing and harvested its edible leaves and berries. When heavy winds brought down a dead pine near the cave, she spent 3 exhausting days breaking it apart and dragging the pieces back to her shelter for firewood. 2 weeks after finding the cave, Eleanor had established a routine of sorts. Each morning, she checked her snares and gathered what edible plants she could find. Midday was spent on the never-ending task of collecting firewood. Evenings were dedicated to preparing food, maintaining her tools, and planning for the baby's arrival. She'd created a small store of clean pine needles and soft moss to serve as bedding for the child. From the remnants of her petticoat, she'd fashioned crude but serviceable swaddling clothes. A flat stone near the fire pit had become her work surface for preparing herbs she hoped might ease childbirth when the time came. Throughout it all, the baby grew increasingly active, its movements a constant reminder of why she fought so hard to survive. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings as she sat by the fire, Eleanor sang softly to her unborn child, lullabies her own mother had sung, folk songs from her childhood, even tunes she invented herself. The simple act helped combat the crushing loneliness of her existence. "Your father would be so proud of us," she often told the baby during these moments. "William was a kind man, nothing like his brother. He would have loved you so much." William Henderson had been different from the rest of his family, gentler, more thoughtful, with none of the arrogance that characterized his older brother Charles. As the ranch's bookkeeper, William had treated Eleanor with respect from her first day as a housekeeper. "What I want, Miss Collins, is to ensure that Charles Henderson doesn't harm another innocent person. Beyond that, I have a comfortable home with plenty of room, and you have need of shelter. It seems a simple enough arrangement." "Nothing is simple where the Hendersons are concerned," Eleanor replied, her free hand unconsciously moving to touch the locket at her throat, William's last gift to her. Gabriel's eyes followed the movement, resting on the gold locket for a moment, before meeting her gaze again. "No," he agreed quietly. "Nothing is ever simple with that family." Something in his tone, a personal bitterness that matched her own, made Eleanor reconsider her reluctance. This man, whatever his motivations, clearly had no love for Charles Henderson. For now, that might be enough common ground to trust him. "Very well," she conceded. "We'll come to your ranch." The journey to Winter's ranch was mercifully short. Gabriel had brought a covered sleigh with thick fur blankets to protect Eleanor and Charlotte from the cold. Mrs. Larson rode alongside them on a sturdy mare, occasionally checking to ensure the baby remained warm despite the freezing temperatures. As they crested a hill, Eleanor got her first view of Gabriel Winter's home. Unlike the ostentatious mansion Charles Henderson had built, Winter's ranch was a sprawling, practical establishment. The main house, constructed of solid timber and local stone, sat proudly on a rise overlooking extensive corrals and stables. Smoke rose from several chimneys, promising warmth within. Beyond the house stretched fenced pastures where horses moved in graceful herds across the snow-covered landscape. "You raise horses," Eleanor observed, remembering the fragments of gossip she'd heard at Henderson Ranch. Gabriel nodded, a hint of pride softening his usual reserve. "The finest in the territory. Thoroughbreds crossed with sturdy mountain stock, beautiful animals with the intelligence to handle this terrain." As they approached the house, several ranch hands appeared, respectfully greeting Gabriel as Mr. Winters while casting curious glances at Eleanor and the baby. Gabriel ignored their obvious interest, helping Eleanor from the sleigh and escorting her directly into the house. The interior was unexpectedly refined, not lavish like Henderson's displays of wealth, but comfortable and tasteful. Polished wooden floors gleamed beneath quality rugs. Well-crafted furniture invited relaxation rather than formal posturing. Most surprising were the bookshelves lining one entire wall of the main sitting room, filled with leather-bound volumes. "You like to read," Eleanor said, unable to hide her surprise. A fleeting smile crossed Gabriel's face. "Does that strike you as incompatible with ranching?" "Not incompatible," she replied carefully. "Just unexpected." Mrs. Larson bustled forward, taking charge of the situation with practiced efficiency. "Let me show you to your rooms, Miss Collins. You'll want to get the little one settled." The rooms prepared for Eleanor and Charlotte exceeded anything she could have imagined. A spacious bedroom with a four-poster bed and adjoining sitting area connected to a smaller room, perfectly appointed as a nursery. A cradle, beautifully crafted from dark wood, stood ready beside a rocking chair near the window. "This cradle," Mrs. Larson explained, noting Eleanor's wonder as she traced the intricate carvings with her fingertips, belonged to Mr. Winter's mother, family heirloom. The gesture, lending such a personal item to a virtual stranger, touched Eleanor deeply. "It's beautiful," she murmured, gently laying Charlotte in the cradle. The baby sighed in her sleep, tiny fingers flexing before settling into peaceful slumber. Later that evening, after a simple but nourishing dinner, served in her room, Eleanor ventured downstairs. Charlotte was sleeping soundly under Mrs. Larson's watchful eye, and Eleanor felt strong enough to seek out her enigmatic host and press for the answers she needed. She found Gabriel in the library, seated in a leather chair beside the fire, a book open in his hands and a glass of amber liquid on the small table beside him. He rose when she entered, setting the book aside. "Miss Collins, should you be up and about so soon?" "I'm stronger than I look," Eleanor replied, taking the chair opposite his. "And I have questions that won't wait." Gabriel nodded, resuming his seat. "I expected as much. Ask what you will." "Why do you hate Charles Henderson?" Eleanor began directly. "It's more than a business rivalry. I can see it in your eyes whenever his name is mentioned." Gabriel studied her for a long moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. Finally, he took a deliberate sip from his glass before answering. "Charles Henderson destroyed my family," he said, his voice controlled but edged with old pain. "My father owned the land where Henderson's mansion now stands. Henderson wanted it for the water rights. The spring there is the finest in the county. When my father refused to sell, Henderson manipulated the territorial bank to call in loans. My father didn't even know he had." Eleanor listened intently, recognizing the ruthless tactics Charles had employed against others who stood in his way. "My father lost everything," Gabriel continued. "The shame killed him, a heart attack 1 week after we were forced from our home. My mother took ill soon after, the combination of grief and harsh living conditions. She didn't survive the winter." "I'm sorry," Eleanor said softly, understanding now the personal vendetta that drove him. Gabriel acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. "I was 17. I went east to my mother's brother in Boston, worked my way through college, made connections, and built my own fortune in shipping. Then I came back, bought this land that borders Henderson's, and set about building a competing operation. That would eventually drive him to ruin." "Revenge," Eleanor said, not as a judgment, but as a simple recognition of his motivation. "Justice," Gabriel corrected. "Henderson has hurt many people over the years. Someone needs to stop him." Eleanor's hand went unconsciously to her locket again. "William never mentioned any of this." Gabriel's expression sharpened. "You knew William Henderson well?" The moment had come for her own revelations. Eleanor took a deep breath. "William was Charlotte's father. We were to be married in Denver this spring, before he fell ill." Gabriel sat back, surprise evident in his features. William was the youngest Henderson brother. Nothing like Charles or the middle brother James. "No," Eleanor agreed. "William was kind, thoughtful. He wanted no part of his family's business practices. That's why we planned to leave secretly. He knew Charles would never accept our marriage. And when William died," Gabriel prompted gently, "I had nowhere to go. I was already with child but not yet showing. I thought I could hide it long. Enough to save money for passage to Denver." Eleanor's voice caught as she remembered those desperate months. "But Charles discovered my condition. He made it clear that no child of William's would live to claim any portion of the Henderson fortune, not a child born to a housekeeper." Gabriel's expression darkened. "So you fled into the mountains in winter rather than face his wrath." "A desperate choice." "The only choice," Eleanor corrected firmly. "I would do anything to protect my child." Understanding passed between them, a recognition of shared purpose despite their different paths. Both had suffered at Charles Henderson's hands. Both sought not just personal vengeance, but a larger justice. "Your daughter will be safe here," Gabriel said after a moment. "Henderson wouldn't dare move against my property directly, not with the federal case pending against him for water rights violations. My men are loyal and well-armed. You can stay until you decide what you want to do next." "Thank you," Eleanor said simply, recognizing the genuine offer of sanctuary. As February gave way to March, Eleanor settled into life at Henderson Ranch. Her strength returned quickly, aided by good food and the peaceful routine that developed around Charlotte's needs. The baby thrived, gaining weight and becoming more alert each day. Mrs. Larson remained a constant support, sharing her wisdom about childcare while respecting Eleanor's instincts as a mother. Gabriel Winters proved to be an unexpectedly considerate host. Though often busy with ranch operations, he made time each evening to check on Eleanor and Charlotte. At first, these visits were brief and somewhat formal, but gradually they evolved into longer conversations by the library fire. Eleanor discovered that Gabriel was well-educated and widely read, qualities that had surprised her in a man who presented himself primarily as a rancher. He spoke knowledgeably about literature, science, and current affairs, often recommending books from his extensive library that he thought might interest her. For his part, Gabriel seemed increasingly fascinated by Eleanor's resilience and intelligence. He listened attentively to her stories of survival in the cave, asking thoughtful questions about her methods and resourcefulness. "Most people would have perished within days in those conditions," he remarked one evening, genuine admiration in his voice. "You managed for weeks while pregnant." Eleanor shrugged, uncomfortable with praise for what had simply been necessary. "I didn't have the luxury of giving up. Charlotte depended on me." "Nevertheless," Gabriel insisted, "it was extraordinary." These quiet evenings became a highlight for Eleanor, a welcome adult interaction amid her days focused on Charlotte. Despite her initial wariness, she found herself beginning to trust Gabriel, not just his protection, but his company and conversation as well. March brought warmer temperatures and the first hints of spring to the high country. Snow began to recede from south-facing slopes, revealing patches of dormant grass beneath. The change in season lifted everyone's spirits at the ranch, bringing with it the promise of easier travel and new beginnings. It was during this thaw that trouble arrived at Henderson Ranch. Eleanor was walking in the garden behind the house, Charlotte bundled against the spring chill and sleeping peacefully in her arms when she heard raised voices from the direction of the main gate. Moving to the garden wall, she peered cautiously over the top to see a group of riders confronting Gabriel and several of his ranch hands. Even at a distance, she recognized Charles Henderson's imposing figure at the head of the group. Beside him rode his middle brother, James, and behind them at least 10 armed men, not regular ranch hands but the kind of hired guns Henderson employed for his more unsavory dealings. Fear clutched at Eleanor's heart. She ducked below the wall, clutching Charlotte more tightly as she strained to hear the exchange. "You're trespassing, Henderson," Gabriel's voice carried clearly, steel beneath his controlled tone. "Turn around and leave my property." "I've come for what's mine, Winters," Charles Henderson replied, his arrogant drawl unmistakable. "The woman and the child. Hand them over, and we'll depart peacefully." "There's no one here by that description," Gabriel responded coolly. "And even if there were, they wouldn't belong to you." Henderson's laugh held no humor. "My brother's bastard carries Henderson blood. That makes the child family business." "Your brother's child," Gabriel countered, emphasis on the possessive, "would have legal rights to a portion of the Henderson estate. Is that what concerns you, Charles? That a baby might one day claim what you've stolen from others?" Eleanor couldn't see Charles Henderson's face, but she could imagine the fury that would be building there. Gabriel was publicly challenging him, questioning both his honor and his motives. "I won't ask again, Winters," Henderson growled. Send out the woman and child, or we'll come in and take them." "You're welcome to try," Gabriel replied evenly. "But be aware that my men are under orders to shoot anyone who crosses that gate without my permission. And unlike your hired thugs, my ranch hands are loyal because they're treated with respect, not fear." "They won't miss." A tense silence followed. Eleanor held her breath, acutely aware of Charlotte's vulnerability in her arms. "If shooting started—" "This isn't over, Winters," Henderson finally snarled. "The law in this territory listens to me, not some upstart from Boston playing cowboy." "Perhaps," Gabriel agreed mildly. "But federal marshals listen to evidence, not local influence. You might want to consider that before your next move." Something in his tone, a confidence, that suggested he held cards not yet played, must have given Henderson pause. After another moment of tense silence, Eleanor heard the sounds of horses being turned around, followed by Henderson's parting threat. "Watch your back, Winters. Accidents happen in this country all the time." Only when the hoofbeats had faded, completely did Eleanor dare to rise and peer over the wall again. Gabriel stood watching the departing riders, his posture rigid with contained anger. As if sensing her gaze, he turned toward the garden, his expression softening when he spotted her. "You heard," he said, approaching the wall. Eleanor nodded, unconsciously holding Charlotte closer. "He won't give up. Charles Henderson never does." "Neither do I," Gabriel replied simply. He reached out, hesitated, then gently touched Charlotte's cheek with one finger. "Go inside. I need to speak with my men about increasing security." That evening, once Charlotte was asleep in her cradle, Eleanor found Gabriel in the library as usual. The confrontation had changed something between them, created a new urgency that charged the air as she took her customary seat across from him. "Henderson will try again," she said without preamble. "I should leave before I bring more trouble to your door." Gabriel looked up sharply from the papers he'd been reviewing. "And go where? Back to a cave in the mountains?" "Denver. Where?" "Henderson has business connections who would recognize you instantly." "I don't know," Eleanor admitted, frustration coloring her voice. "But I can't keep hiding behind your protection forever. It isn't fair to you, and it's no life for Charlotte." Gabriel set aside his papers with deliberate care. "I have a proposition for you, Miss Collins. One that might solve several problems at once." Eleanor regarded him warily. "What sort of proposition?" "Marry me." The words hung in the air between them, stunning in their directness. Eleanor stared at him, certain she had misheard. "Marry you?" she repeated incredulously. "Why would you suggest such a thing?" Gabriel leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Think about it practically. As my wife, you would have legal protection that Henderson couldn't easily circumvent. Charlotte would have my name, my resources to support her future. Henderson would have no claim on either of you." "Marriage isn't a business arrangement, Mr. Winters," Eleanor protested, though part of her recognized the practical wisdom in his suggestion. "Isn't it, though?" Gabriel countered. "For most of history, that's exactly what it has been, an alliance of mutual benefit. We get along well enough. We share common interests, similar values, and a common enemy. It's a more solid foundation than many marriages can claim." Eleanor rose from her chair, moving to the window to gaze out at the darkening landscape. "You speak as if emotions have no place in such decisions." Gabriel was silent for a moment, before responding more softly. "I'm not entirely without feeling in this matter, Eleanor." The use of her given name, the first time he had done so, brought her eyes back to his. What she saw there made her breath catch, not just the expected determination, but a vulnerability he had never before revealed. "I've grown to admire you greatly," he continued, holding her gaze. "Your courage, your intelligence, your devotion to your daughter. I believe we could build a good life together, one based on mutual respect, if not the romantic love of poetry books." Eleanor turned fully to face him. "And Charlotte?" You would raise another man's child as your own. Charlotte is an innocent, Gabriel said firmly. She deserves every advantage, every protection I can provide. Yes, I would claim her legally. As my daughter, with all that entails. The offer was more generous than Eleanor could have imagined. Marriage to Gabriel Winters would solve her most pressing problems, providing safety, security, and a future for Charlotte that Eleanor could never ensure on her own. Yet something held her back from immediate acceptance. I need time to consider, she said finally. This isn't a decision to make hastily. Gabriel nodded, no hint of offense at her hesitation. Of course, take the time you need. Before either could say more, a commotion erupted outside, shouting voices, running footsteps, and the unmistakable crackling roar of fire. Gabriel was on his feet instantly, moving to the window. The stables, he said grimly, already striding toward the door. Henderson didn't waste any time. Eleanor followed him to the front entrance, where ranch hands were racing toward the burning building, carrying buckets and shouting instructions. The night sky glowed orange with reflected flames as the fire consumed the wooden structure with frightening speed. The horses, Eleanor gasped, knowing how much Gabriel's prized animals meant to him. My men will get them out if they can. Gabriel replied tersely, pulling on his coat. Stay here with Charlotte. Keep a weapon close. Before she could respond, he was gone, running toward the conflagration with the same determined stride he brought to everything. Eleanor watched from the doorway as Gabriel organized his men into a bucket line, directing others to lead frightened horses from the burning stables. His calm authority in crisis was impressive. No shouting or panic, just clear directives that his men followed without question. As she was about to close the door and return to check on Charlotte, Eleanor noticed movement at the edge of her vision, a shadow detaching itself from the darkness near the side of the house, moving with deliberate stealth toward the back entrance. Henderson's men, she realized with a surge of fear. The fire was a diversion. Closing the front door quietly, Eleanor moved swiftly through the house to Charlotte's nursery. The baby slept peacefully, unaware of the danger approaching. With trembling hands, Eleanor lifted her daughter, wrapped her securely in a blanket, and placed her in a large woven basket that Mrs. Larson sometimes used for carrying laundry. From the drawer beside her bed, Eleanor retrieved the pistol Gabriel had given her for protection. She checked that it was loaded, then tucked it into the pocket of her dress. Its weight unfamiliar but reassuring. Mrs. Larson appeared in the doorway, her face tight with worry. There's men trying to break in through the kitchen, she whispered. Mr. Gabriel's foreman saw them from the yard. He's coming with help, but we need to hide you and the little one. Where? Eleanor asked, lifting the basket with Charlotte inside. The root cellar, Mrs. Larson decided after a moment's thought. There's a hidden compartment Mr. Gabriel's father built during the border troubles. Follow me and step quiet. They made their way through the house by the dim light of a single candle, moving toward the kitchen where a trapdoor led to the storage cellar below. As they passed the library, the sound of breaking glass confirmed that intruders had indeed breached the house. Hurry, Mrs. Larson urged, extinguishing the candle as they reached the kitchen. The older woman lifted the trapdoor with surprising strength, revealing narrow steps leading down into darkness. Eleanor descended carefully, the basket with Charlotte cradled protectively against her chest. Mrs. Larson followed, pulling the mate culling. The trapdoor closed above them. In the pitch blackness of the cellar, Mrs. Larson guided Eleanor to the far wall. There's a spring catch here, she whispered, her hands moving confidently despite the darkness. Press it, there, feel that. Eleanor's fingers found the small metal lever. When pressed, a section of the wall swung inward, revealing a small chamber beyond. Get inside with the baby, Mrs. Larson instructed. I'll go back up, try to lead them away from here. No, Eleanor protested. Come with us, it's too dangerous. Someone needs to misdirect them, the older woman insisted. I've known Mr. Gabriel since he was born. I won't let these villains harm what's his. Before Eleanor could argue further, the sound of the trapdoor opening interrupted them. Mrs. Larson pushed Eleanor into the hidden compartment, closing the false wall until only a narrow crack remained, enough to speak through but nearly invisible. In the darkness, "Whatever happens, stay silent," Mrs. Larson whispered. "Mr. Gabriel will come for you." Through the small opening, Eleanor watched as a lantern illuminated the cellar. Two men descended the stairs, rough-looking individuals with guns drawn. Behind them came James Henderson, Charles's brother and willing accomplice in all his schemes. "Check every corner," James ordered. "The woman and child have to be somewhere in this house." As the men began searching the cellar, Mrs. Larson stepped forward, deliberately drawing their attention. "What are you doing in Mr. Winter's house?" she demanded, playing the role of an indignant housekeeper perfectly. James Henderson turned, his cold gaze on her. "Where is the Collins woman? Where's the child?" "I don't know who you're talking about," Mrs. Larson replied with convincing bewilderment. "There's no one here but me and the ranch hands." One of the gunmen grabbed Mrs. Larson's arm roughly. "Search upstairs again," he told his companion. "I'll make the old woman talk." Eleanor watched in horror, her hand moving to the pistol in her pocket. If they harmed Mrs. Larson, she would have to intervene, regardless of the risk to herself and Charlotte. Before the situation could escalate further, gunshots echoed from above, followed by shouts and the sound of running feet. James Henderson's head snapped up, his expression darkening. "Something's wrong," he muttered. "Bring her. We'll question her elsewhere." As they dragged Mrs. Larson toward the stairs, the cellar door flew open. Gabriel Winters stood framed in the opening, a rifle in his hands and fury in his eyes. Behind him, several of his ranch hands aimed weapons down into the cellar. "Let her go," Gabriel commanded, his voice deadly quiet. Now, James Henderson reached for his gun, but Gabriel was faster. A single shot rang out, and Henderson clutched his shoulder, blood seeping between his fingers as he cursed in pain. "The next one goes through your heart," Gabriel promised, his aim unwavering. "Tell your men to drop their weapons." Faced with overwhelming odds, the intruders complied. Gabriel's ranch hands descended into the cellar, quickly disarming and restraining them. Only when the situation was fully under control did Gabriel lower his rifle slightly. "Mrs. Larson, are you hurt?" "No, Mr. Gabriel," she assured him, straightening her apron with dignity despite her ordeal. "Just righteously angry at these scoundrels invading your home." Gabriel's eyes scanned the cellar. "Eleanor? Charlotte?" "Safe," Mrs. Larson replied, moving to the hidden compartment. "Right where they should be." As the false wall swung open, revealing Eleanor with the basket containing Charlotte, Gabriel's rigid posture relaxed slightly. Relief flashed across his features, quickly replaced by renewed determination as he turned back to James Henderson. "You've made a grave mistake tonight," he told the wounded man. "Breaking into my home, threatening my household, endangering a child. These are federal offenses. The territorial court may answer to your brother, but federal marshals don't." James Henderson glared defiantly despite his injury. "You've got nothing, Winters. It'll be your word against ours." Gabriel smiled coldly. "Actually, I have written orders signed by your brother instructing you to retrieve the child by any means necessary. My men found them on one of your thugs out by the stables. Conspiracy, attempted kidnapping, arson. The list grows impressive." For the first time, uncertainty crept into James Henderson's expression. Eleanor stepped forward, Charlotte now awake but quiet in her arms. She studied James Henderson, this man who had been willing to harm an innocent child for money and power. "Your brother's empire is built on quicksand," she told him quietly. William knew it. That's why he wanted to leave. He saw what greed was doing to his family. At the mention of William, James flinched almost imperceptibly. William was weak, he muttered, but there was little conviction in his voice. William was decent, Eleanor corrected. The only decent Henderson left, it seems. Gabriel signaled to his men. Take them to town. Telegraph the federal marshals. Office in Denver. Tell them we have evidence of criminal conspiracy against the Henderson family. As the intruders were led away, Gabriel turned to Eleanor. His eyes moved from her face to Charlotte, then back again, a question in his gaze. Yes, Eleanor said simply, answering the unspoken proposal that had been interrupted earlier. For Charlotte's sake, and perhaps for ours as well. Understanding passed between them, a commitment made not in the heat of emotion, but in the clarity that follows danger survived together. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it as allies, partners in the truest sense. Outside, the fire in the stables had been extinguished, leaving behind charred timber and the acrid smell of smoke. But like Eleanor herself, the core structure had proven stronger than it appeared, weathering the attack without collapsing. As dawn broke over Winter's Ranch, painting the snow-covered mountains with golden light, Eleanor stood beside Gabriel on the porch, Charlotte sleeping peacefully between them. The night's dangers had passed, but both knew the larger battle with Charles Henderson was far from over. We'll be ready, Gabriel said, as if reading her thoughts. Together. Eleanor nodded, a new determination strengthening her resolve. From desperate fugitive in a mountain cave to this moment of hard-won security, her journey had transformed her in ways she was only beginning to understand. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she would face them not from a place of fear, but from this newfound strength. Charlotte stirred in her sleep, tiny fingers curling around Eleanor's thumb. For her daughter's future, for the promise of justice against those who abused power, and perhaps for the unexpected second chance at happiness that had found her. Eleanor would continue forward, no longer running away but standing firmly beside the man who had risked everything to protect what he valued. Spring blossomed across the Colorado Rockies, transforming the landscape around Winter's Ranch into a tapestry of new life. Meadows that had lain dormant beneath winter's snow now erupted with wildflowers. Aspen trees unfurled fresh green leaves that whispered in the mountain breeze. Nature's renewal mirrored the changes taking place in Eleanor's life as she prepared for her wedding to Gabriel Winters. The ceremony was set for the first day of May, a simple affair to be held in the garden behind the main house. Though practical considerations had motivated Gabriel's proposal, Eleanor found herself approaching the day with unexpected anticipation. Their relationship had evolved over the weeks following the attack on the ranch, deepening through shared danger and quiet evenings of conversation by the library fire. On the morning of her wedding day, Eleanor stood before the mirror in her bedroom, studying her reflection with a critical eye. The dress Mrs. Larson had helped her create was elegant. In its simplicity, pale blue silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Not traditional white, but fitting for a widow and mother beginning a new chapter rather than a young bride's first marriage. "You look beautiful," came a voice from the doorway. Eleanor turned to find Gabriel watching her, his expression uncharacteristically soft. He was already dressed for the ceremony in a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders and tall frame. "It's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding," she chided gently, though in truth she was glad for these few private moments before they faced the public ceremony. Gabriel smiled, a rare expression that transformed his usually serious features. "I've never been one for superstition." He approached, stopping a respectful distance away. From his pocket, he withdrew a small velvet box. "I have something for you, a wedding gift." Eleanor accepted the box, opening it to find a gold pendant nestled on dark velvet. The design was intricate, a tree with spreading branches. Tiny diamonds nestled among the golden leaves. "It's beautiful," she murmured, touching the pendant gently. "It was my mother's," Gabriel explained. The tree represents family, roots and branches growing together, I thought. I hoped you might wear it today. The gesture moved Eleanor deeply. She removed William's locket from around her neck. She would always cherish it as Charlotte's connection to her father, but today marked a new beginning. Would you help me? She asked, offering the pendant to Gabriel. He stepped behind her, his fingers brushing the nape of her neck as he fastened the clasp. The brief contact sent an unexpected warmth through Eleanor, a reminder that while their marriage had begun as a practical arrangement, genuine feeling had begun to grow between them. "There," Gabriel said, his voice slightly rougher than usual. His hands rested lightly on her shoulders for a moment before he stepped back. "Perfect." Eleanor turned to face him, suddenly needing to ensure they understood each other before taking their vows. "Gabriel, I want you to know that I'm entering this marriage with clear eyes and an open heart. What began as necessity has become something more to me." Gabriel's expression grew serious again, but his eyes remained warm. "And to me as well, Eleanor. I didn't expect to find someone like you, especially not in a bare cave in the middle of winter." His attempt at humor softened the intensity of the moment. "Whatever comes, we face it together, as partners, as friends, and perhaps, in time, as something more." A knock at the door interrupted them. Mrs. Larson, carrying Charlotte in her christening gown. "It's time, Mr. Gabriel. The judge has arrived, and guests are gathering in the garden." The ceremony unfolded beneath an archway of early blooming roses. Judge Harmon, a federal magistrate and no friend to Charles Henderson, had ridden from Denver to officiate, bringing with him news that the case against James Henderson was proceeding. Ranch hands and their families formed the small congregation, their presence a testament to the respect Gabriel had earned through fair dealing and honest work. As Eleanor and Gabriel exchanged vows, Charlotte slept peacefully in Mrs. Larson's arms, blissfully unaware of the significance of the day that would secure her future. The legal protections of marriage would shield both mother and daughter from Charles Henderson's reach, at least in theory. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," Judge Harmon declared, closing his book with a satisfied smile. "May your union bring strength to you both and justice to those who deserve it." The pointed reference to their ongoing battle with the Hendersons wasn't lost on anyone present. As Gabriel kissed Eleanor, a brief, gentle touch that held promise rather than passion, applause erupted from the assembled guests. The celebration that followed was modest but joyful. Tables had been set up in the garden, laden with food prepared by Mrs. Larson and the ranch cook. Musicians from among the ranch hands played lively tunes as children danced and adults conversed in small groups. Eleanor found herself genuinely enjoying the festivities, moving between guests with Charlotte now awake and alert in her arms. Judge Harmon sought them out as the afternoon shadows lengthened, drawing Gabriel and Eleanor aside for a private conversation. "I have news that couldn't wait," he informed them, his voice low despite the music covering their conversation. "Federal marshals have uncovered evidence of extensive fraud in Henderson's cattle operations, falsified brand registrations, bribery of territorial officials, even cattle rustling disguised as legitimate purchases." Gabriel's expression tightened with contained satisfaction. "Will it be enough to bring charges?" "More than enough," the judge confirmed. "Warrants are being prepared as we speak. Charles Henderson won't escape justice this time. His influence with the territorial government won't protect him from federal prosecution." Eleanor felt a complicated mix of emotions at this news. Relief, certainly, that Henderson would face consequences for his actions. Vindication for William, whose moral objections to his family's business practices had been justified. But also concern, knowing that a cornered predator was at his most dangerous. "He'll fight," she warned. "Charles Henderson doesn't surrender, even when defeated." Judge Harmon nodded grimly. "Which is why I've arranged for additional federal marshals to patrol this area until he's in custody. Your testimony regarding his threats against you and..." Charlotte will strengthen the case considerably. Later that evening, as darkness fell and the wedding guests departed, Eleanor stood on the porch of what was now truly her home. Gabriel joined her, offering a glass of champagne as they watched the last of the lanterns disappearing down the road toward the ranch workers' cottages. "Happy?" he asked simply. Eleanor considered the question, finding the answer came easily. "Yes," she replied. "Despite everything, or perhaps because of it, I am." Gabriel raised his glass in a toast. "To unexpected beginnings." "And to justice long overdue," Eleanor added, touching her glass to his. They drank in companionable silence, watching stars emerge in the clear mountain sky. Neither mentioned the question of sleeping arrangements. By unspoken agreement, they would take time to allow their relationship to develop naturally, without the pressure of immediate physical intimacy. When Charlotte's fussing signaled feeding time, Gabriel squeezed Eleanor's hand gently. "Good night, Mrs. Winters. I'll see you in the morning." The use of her new name, the first time he had addressed her as such, brought a smile to Eleanor's lips. "Good night, Mr. Winters." As spring flowed into early summer, life at Winters Ranch settled into a pleasant rhythm. Eleanor gradually assumed the responsibilities of managing the household, working alongside Mrs. Larson rather than simply replacing her. Gabriel's business affairs often took him away for days at a time, but he always returned with small gifts for Charlotte and increasingly affectionate greetings for Eleanor. Their marriage, begun as a practical alliance, was blossoming into something neither had anticipated. They still maintained separate bedrooms, but spent evenings together in the library or walking the grounds, their conversations ranging from books to ranch management to plans for Charlotte's future. Charlotte herself thrived, growing from newborn to infant with remarkable speed. At 4 months old, she had Gabriel wrapped firmly around her tiny fingers, greeting his returns with excited kicks and coos that never failed to elicit a besotted smile from the usually serious man. "She has your eyes," Gabriel observed one evening as Eleanor rocked Charlotte to sleep in the nursery. "That same determination when she wants something." Eleanor laughed softly. "And William's smile, I think." Gabriel's expression remained open at the mention of William, a testament to his security in their relationship. She'd be beautiful and strong like her mother. Such moments of tenderness were becoming more frequent between them, the initial awkwardness of their arrangement gradually giving way to genuine affection. Eleanor found herself watching for Gabriel's return when he was away, missing their evening conversations and the steady presence he provided. In late June, a letter arrived from Denver bearing the federal court's seal. Gabriel read it at the breakfast table, his expression darkening as he scanned the contents. "What is it?" Eleanor asked, noting the tension in his shoulders. "Charles Henderson has disappeared," Gabriel replied, handing her the letter. "Federal marshals went to arrest him yesterday, but he'd already fled. His ranch house was empty. Valuable items and documents missing." Cold fear washed through Eleanor. "He's coming here. He knows I'll testify against him." Gabriel nodded grimly. "Judge Harmon thinks the same. He's sending additional marshals, but they won't arrive for at least 3 days. Eleanor's arms tightened around Charlotte, who sat in her lap happily gumming a wooden teething ring. "What do we do?" "Prepare," Gabriel answered, his tone shifting from husband to strategist. "We have 20 reliable men on the ranch, all armed and loyal. We'll set watches, restrict movement to the main buildings, and keep rifles ready. Henderson won't find us unprepared as he did before." The next 2 days passed in tense preparation. Ranch hands moved their families into the main house for safety, creating a makeshift community within the defensible structure. Gabriel distributed weapons and organized round-the-clock patrols of the property boundaries. Eleanor ensured supplies were adequate if they needed to withstand a prolonged siege. On the 3rd morning, as Eleanor was changing Charlotte in the nursery, Mrs. Larson burst into the room, her normally composed face tight with alarm. "Riders approaching from the south ridge," she reported breathlessly. "At least 15 men. Moving fast. Mr. Gabriel says to bring the baby downstairs immediately." Eleanor swiftly wrapped Charlotte in a blanket and followed Mrs. Larson down the back stairs to the kitchen, where Gabriel was issuing rapid instructions to his foreman. "Position 4 men at each corner of the house," he directed. "Keep the rest in reserve to respond wherever they're needed. And Thomas, make sure everyone understands. Shoot to stop, not to kill if possible. We want prisoners for the marshals, not corpses." The foreman nodded and hurried out, shouting orders to the men taking positions at windows and doorways. Gabriel turned to Eleanor, his expression softening briefly as he took in her and Charlotte. "They're coming faster than I expected," he said, checking the revolver at his hip. "Stay in the root cellar with Charlotte and Mrs. Larson. It's the safest place if shooting starts." Eleanor handed Charlotte to Mrs. Larson, then reached for Gabriel's arm before he could leave. "Be careful," she said softly. "We need you." The simple declaration, acknowledging their dependence not just on his protection, but on his presence in their lives, brought a fleeting smile to Gabriel's face. He covered her hand with his own, squeezing gently. "I'll be back before you know it," he promised. As Mrs. Larson led the way toward the cellar, Eleanor cast one last glance at Gabriel, standing tall and resolute, preparing to defend his home and family. The sight burned into her memory as she descended into the darkness below. The root cellar, with its hidden compartment, was indeed the safest place in the house. But sitting in darkness while danger threatened those she cared about tested Eleanor's patience severely. Charlotte, sensing her mother's tension, became fussy and difficult to soothe. "Hush now, little lamb," Mrs. Larson murmured, taking the baby to give Eleanor a brief respite. "Your papa will send those bad men running. Just you wait and see." The casual reference to Gabriel as Charlotte's father brought unexpected tears to Eleanor's eyes. In just a few months, he had indeed become a father to her daughter in all the ways that mattered: protective, affectionate, invested in her future. The thought of losing him now, just as their family was truly forming, was unbearable. Above them, the sounds of confrontation became audible, shouted challenges, the thunder of hooves circling the house, then the sharp crack of gunfire. Eleanor flinched at each shot, imagining Gabriel exposed to danger, perhaps already wounded. Or worse. "I can't stay down here," she decided suddenly, rising from her seat on an old crate. "Mrs. Larson, please keep Charlotte safe. I need to help." The older woman's eyes widened in alarm. "Mrs. Winters, you can't go up there. Mr. Gabriel would never forgive me if I let you put yourself in danger." "I'm not asking permission," Eleanor replied firmly. "Charlotte needs you more than me, right? Now, I'll be careful, but I won't hide while others fight our battles." Before Mrs. Larson could protest further, Eleanor climbed the cellar steps and cautiously pushed open the trapdoor. The kitchen was empty, though she could hear movement and voices from the front of the house. Moving quietly, she made her way to Gabriel's study, where she knew he kept a rifle in a cabinet behind his desk. The weapon was heavier than she'd expected, but not unfamiliar. Her father had taught her basic marksmanship during their hunting trips years ago. She checked that it was loaded, then moved toward the front of the house, staying low beneath window level. The main hall was a hive of controlled activity, ranch hands moving between defensive positions, passing ammunition and reports. The front windows, Eleanor could see riders circling the house at a distance, occasionally firing toward the building, but meeting strong return fire from Gabriel's men. She spotted Gabriel at the front door, conferring with his foreman while keeping watch on the attackers' movements. His face was streaked with sweat and gunpowder residue, but he appeared unharmed. "They're trying to draw us out," he was saying as Eleanor approached. "Keep the men inside the defensive perimeter. Don't let them," he broke off, noticing Eleanor. "With the rifle, what are you doing up here? You should be in the cellar with Charlotte." Mrs. Larson has Charlotte, Eleanor replied calmly. I can shoot, and you need every able defender. Gabriel looked as if he wanted to argue, but a shout from one of his men interrupted him. Mr. Winters. They're making a run at the east side. The momentary distraction was all it took. A shot cracked from somewhere to their left, and Gabriel stumbled backward, his hand going to his upper arm where blood was already soaking through his shirt sleeve. Gabriel! Eleanor cried, moving forward to support him. I'm all right, he grimaced, though his face had paled. Just grazed me. A voice called from outside, amplified by a speaking trumpet, arrogant, commanding, and chillingly familiar to Eleanor. Send out the woman and child, Winters. You've lost men already, and there will be more blood unless you surrender what belongs to the Henderson family. Charles Henderson had indeed come for his revenge. Gabriel straightened, ignoring the blood seeping between his fingers where he pressed his wound. Get back to the cellar, he told Eleanor, his voice low and urgent. Henderson's more desperate than I thought. He's willing to sacrifice his men to get to you and Charlotte. I'm not leaving you wounded, Eleanor insisted, tearing a strip from her petticoat to bind his arm. And I'm certainly not surrendering to that monster. As she worked, a plan began forming in her mind. Dangerous, perhaps foolish, but possibly their only chance to end this standoff without more bloodshed. Gabriel, she said quietly, finishing the makeshift bandage, I have an idea, but you won't like it. He studied her face, recognizing the determination in her eyes. Tell me. Eleanor outlined her plan quickly, watching various emotions cross. Gabriel's face, alarm, reluctance, and finally grudging admiration. It's too risky, he protested, though with less conviction than she'd expected. Less risky than a prolonged siege until the marshals arrive, Eleanor countered. Henderson is unhinged enough to burn the house down around us if he thinks it will get him what he wants. Gabriel hesitated, then nodded once, sharply. On one condition, you let me position men where they can protect you if something goes wrong. Agreed, Eleanor said, relief flooding through her that he trusted her judgment enough to consider her plan. Let's end this once and for all. Minutes later, Eleanor stood on the front porch of Winters Ranch, her hands raised to show she carried no weapon. Behind her, the door remained open, Gabriel and his men hidden just inside with rifles ready. Charles Henderson, she called, her voice carrying across the yard to where Henderson and his men had taken cover behind overturned wagons and water troughs. I wish to speak with you, alone and unarmed. For a moment, there was no response. Then a figure rose. From behind one of the wagons, tall, broad-shouldered, with the arrogant bearing that had once intimidated her when she worked in his household. Come forward, Mrs. Henderson, he called back, deliberately using the name that denied her marriage. To Gabriel, my men won't shoot if you come alone. Eleanor descended the porch steps, walking steadily across the open yard. Every step exposed her further, but she kept her head high, focusing on the man who had threatened her child's life and forced her into the wilderness in the dead of winter. Charles Henderson looked worse than she remembered, his usually immaculate appearance disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, his expensive coat stained with dust from the trail. The federal investigation had clearly taken its toll even before his flight from justice. That's far enough, he said when she was about 10 feet away. Where's the child? Safe, Eleanor replied simply. And beyond your reach, Charles. His face twisted with anger. The brat carries Henderson blood. That makes it family business, not yours. Her name is Charlotte, Eleanor said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. And she has a father who loves her. Gabriel Winters has legally adopted her as his daughter and heir. This news clearly shocked Henderson. His eyes widened, and he took an involuntary step backward. Impossible. The courts would never allow it without family consent. Judge Harmon signed the papers himself, Eleanor informed him, the lie flowing easily from her lips. There had been no formal adoption yet, But Henderson wouldn't know that. Federal jurisdiction supersedes your territorial influence. Charlotte is legally a Winters now, with all the protections that entails. You're lying, Henderson snarled. But uncertainty had crept into his voice. Eleanor pressed her advantage. Why are you really here, Charles? The federal marshals know everything. The fraud, the bribery, the threats against me and Charlotte. Running only makes you look more guilty. Shut up, Henderson growled, his hand moving toward the gun at his hip. William knew what you were doing, Eleanor continued relentlessly. He kept records, dates, transactions, names of officials you bribed. Did you think he was just a bookkeeper? He was gathering evidence against you. This was another calculated lie, but one based on enough truth to be believable. William had indeed been troubled by his family's business practices, though he hadn't gone so far as to document them as evidence. Henderson's face had gone pale beneath his weather-beaten tan. What records? Where are they? Safe with Judge Harmon, Eleanor replied. Along with my sworn testimony about your threats against William's child, you've lost Charles. The only question now is whether you surrender peacefully or add murder to the charges against you. For a terrible moment, Eleanor thought she had miscalculated. Henderson's hand closed around his gun, his eyes wild with a dangerous mixture of fear and rage. She braced herself, knowing Gabriel's men wouldn't have time to save her if Henderson decided to shoot. Then, unexpectedly, a new voice joined the confrontation, a woman's voice, coming from behind one of the overturned wagons. It's over, Charles. For God's sake, don't add more blood to your hands. Gabriel folded the letter, tucking it into his pocket. Judge Harmon says he's a changed man. The financial ruin and public disgrace apparently accomplished what prison alone couldn't. Eleanor nodded thoughtfully. The Henderson empire had indeed collapsed spectacularly following Charles's arrest. Most of his holdings had been sold to pay restitution to those he had defrauded. His wife Catherine had divorced him during his second year in prison, remarrying a Denver businessman and leaving Colorado entirely. Do you think he still poses a threat? She asked quietly as Charlotte skipped ahead into the kitchen, distracted by the smell of Mrs. Larson's apple pie cooling on the windowsill. Gabriel considered the question seriously. No, he said finally. Judge Harmon says he's elderly now, his health broken. Whatever fire drove him before has burned out. Besides, he added with a slight smile, we're not the same people he threatened back then. We've built something here that can't be easily shaken. His confidence reassured Eleanor. They had indeed built something remarkable, not just a successful ranch, but a community. The original bunkhouse had expanded into a small settlement of comfortable cottages where trusted employees lived with their families. A schoolhouse stood near the main road, serving both ranch children and those from neighboring properties. Plans were underway for a proper church building to replace the simple gathering space they currently used for Sunday services. You're right, Eleanor agreed, linking her arm through his as they followed Charlotte toward the kitchen. The past doesn't hold the power it once did. The next morning dawned clear and perfect for Eleanor's 31st birthday celebration. Though she had insisted on no fuss, Gabriel and Charlotte had clearly conspired behind her back. When she came downstairs, the dining room had been decorated with wildflowers gathered from the meadows, and a small pile of wrapped presents waited beside her plate. "Happy birthday, Mama!" Charlotte exclaimed, rushing forward with a handmade card covered in childish drawings of flowers and horses. "It's beautiful, sweetheart," Eleanor said, genuinely touched by her daughter's efforts. James, not to be outdone, toddled forward with his own contribution, a somewhat squashed bouquet of dandelions. Clutched in his pudgy fist, Mrs. Larson served a special breakfast featuring all of Eleanor's favorites, fresh biscuits with honey from their own hives, eggs from their chickens, and sausage made from their own pigs. The simple meal represented everything Eleanor valued about the life they had created: self-sufficient, honest and nourishing in every sense. As they finished eating, Gabriel cleared his throat. "I've arranged a special outing for your birthday," he announced. "The wagon is already packed. We just need to change into riding clothes." Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Are you going to tell me where we're going?" "It's a surprise, Mama." Charlotte insisted before Gabriel could answer. "But I know where." An hour later, they set out. From the ranch, Gabriel and Eleanor on horseback, the children secure in a small wagon driven by Thomas, Gabriel's trusted foreman, who had become almost family over the years. They followed the northern trail that wound up into the mountains, climbing steadily through pine forests and aspen groves glowing golden in the summer sunshine. Eleanor began to recognize landmarks, a distinctive rock formation, a stream. Crossing, a meadow where columbines grew in unusual abundance. Understanding dawned as they approached a familiar ridge. "We're going to my cave," she said, looking at Gabriel with surprise. He nodded, a slight smile playing around his lips. "I thought it was time Charlotte understood where her remarkable mother came from, what you accomplished before any of us were part of your life." The sentiment behind the gesture touched Eleanor deeply. Though she had shared stories of her survival with Charlotte in age-appropriate ways, she had never brought her daughter to the actual location where she had fought so desperately to keep them both alive. As they crested the final ridge, the cave entrance came into view, smaller than Eleanor remembered, partially obscured by summer foliage, but unmistakably the shelter that had saved her life during those desperate winter months. They dismounted, Gabriel lifting James from the wagon while Charlotte jumped down unassisted, her eyes wide with excitement at exploring this place from her mother's stories. "This is where you lived when I was in your tummy?" she asked, approaching the cave entrance cautiously. "Yes," Eleanor confirmed, taking her daughter's hand. "Shall we go inside?" The interior was much as Eleanor remembered, though 5 years of natural processes had erased most signs of human habitation. The fire pit she had constructed remained, though overgrown with small ferns that had found purchase in the fertile ash. Bones and debris had been carried away by scavenging animals, leaving the space empty but not unwelcoming. "It's so small," Charlotte observed, her voice hushed as if in church. "Were you scared, Mama?" Eleanor considered the question carefully, wanting to be honest without frightening her daughter. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But mostly I was determined that we would survive, that I would find a way to keep you safe." "And you did," Gabriel added from the cave entrance, James balanced on his hip. "Your mother is the bravest person I've ever known." Eleanor smiled at him, grateful for his understanding of why this acknowledgement mattered, not for her ego, but for Charlotte to understand that courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the determination to continue despite it. They spent the afternoon near the cave, enjoying a picnic lunch in the meadow below where Eleanor had once set snares for rabbits. Gabriel and Charlotte waded in the stream while Eleanor sat with James, pointing out the plants she had gathered for food during her time of survival. "That winter changed me," she told Gabriel later as they watched the children chasing butterflies in the meadow. "Before then, I had always seen myself as someone things happened to, a miner's daughter, a housekeeper, William's secret love. But here, alone with nothing but my wits and determination, I discovered who I truly was." Gabriel took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles on her palm. "And who was that?" "Someone who refused to surrender," Eleanor replied thoughtfully. "Someone who could face impossible odds and find a way forward. Someone worthy of creating her own destiny rather than accepting whatever fate handed her." "You've certainly done that," Gabriel observed, gazing proudly at the family they had built together. "Though I like to think I played some small part in the chapters that followed." Eleanor leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing through her. "More than a small part. You offered sanctuary when I needed it most. But you never tried to rescue me. You recognized my strength even when I was at my most vulnerable." The sun began its westward descent, casting long shadows across the meadow and signaling time to return to the ranch. As they packed up the picnic things and prepared to leave, Charlotte approached the cave entrance one last time, placing a small bunch of wildflowers just inside. "What's that for, sweetheart?" Eleanor asked, touched by the gesture. "It's a thank you," Charlotte explained with simple certainty. "To the cave for keeping you and me safe until Papa could find us." The childish tribute brought unexpected tears to Eleanor's eyes. "That's very thoughtful." As they rode away, Eleanor glanced back at the cave one last time. What had once been a place of desperation had transformed in her memory to a symbol of her own strength, a crucible that had revealed the steel at her core. She silently thanked the simple shelter that had protected her during her darkest hours, grateful that she could now visit it from a place of security rather than fear. The journey home was filled with Charlotte's chatter as she processed everything she had learned about her mother's extraordinary past. Even James seemed affected by the day's significance, sitting quietly in the wagon and watching the mountains with unusual intensity for a 2-year-old. They were within sight of the ranch when Thomas suddenly reined in the wagon, pointing toward the main house. "Riders," he said tersely. "Not our men." Gabriel immediately moved his horse in front of Eleanor and the wagon, his hand going to the rifle secured to his saddle. "How many?" "Just 2, Thomas replied, narrowing his eyes against the setting sun. "One looks to be a woman." Eleanor felt a prickle of unease, remembering Judge Harmon's letter about Charles Henderson's impending release. Could he have been freed earlier than expected? But Henderson would hardly bring a woman with him if revenge was his purpose. As they approached cautiously, Eleanor could make out the visitors more clearly. A woman in a fashionable riding habit sitting straight backed on a chestnut mare, and beside her an older man on a more modest gelding, his posture suggesting physical discomfort or illness. Recognition dawned simultaneously for both Eleanor and Gabriel. "Catherine Henderson," he said under his breath, "and that appears to be Charles with her." Eleanor's hands tightened on her reins. What could they possibly want after all this time? There was no opportunity for speculation as they reached the ranch yard. The visitors had dismounted and were waiting on the porch, having apparently been offered refreshment by Mrs. Larson, who stood watchfully in the doorway. That suggests something beyond mere legal restitution. Eleanor rested her head against Gabriel's shoulder, one hand unconsciously moving to her abdomen where their third child grew. "Life takes such unexpected turns," she mused. If someone had told me during those desperate days in the cave that one day Charles Henderson would be sleeping under my roof as a welcome guest, I'd have thought them mad. Gabriel chuckled softly. If someone had told me I'd find my future wife in a bare cave in the dead of winter, I might have questioned their sanity as well. The gentle humor broke the last of the tension Eleanor had carried since recognizing their visitors. She turned in Gabriel's arms, kissing him with quiet passion that conveyed both gratitude for the present and healing of the past. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said as they parted, "whatever the future brings, I'm thankful for the path that led us here, every step of it, even the painful ones." "As am I," Gabriel agreed, his eyes reflecting starlight and deeper emotions. "Especially the moment I decided to explore that particular cave on that particular winter day." Morning brought a surprising ease to what could have been an awkward breakfast. Charlotte, initially shy around the elegant Catherine, quickly warmed to her when the older woman produced a small silver locket containing a miniature portrait of William as a young man. "Your father at about your age," Catherine explained, helping Charlotte open the delicate clasp. "You have his smile, did you know that?" Charlotte studied the portrait solemnly before looking up at Eleanor for confirmation. "Mama says I have his kind heart, too." "Indeed you do," Catherine agreed, genuine warmth in her voice. "William always saw the best in everyone. It was his greatest gift." Charles Henderson observed this exchange silently from the far end of the table, his expression unreadable but his eyes never leaving Charlotte's animated face. When breakfast concluded, he asked permission to speak with Eleanor privately before their departure. In the study that had once been Gabriel's exclusive domain, but had gradually become a shared space reflecting both their interests, Eleanor faced the man who had once been her greatest fear. "I want you to know," Charles began hesitantly, "that William spoke of you often in his final days. His feelings were genuine and deep." "I know," Eleanor replied simply, "as were mine for him." Charles nodded, seemingly gathering courage for what he needed to say next. "I was wrong about many things, Mrs. Winters. Wrong about William's choice in you. Wrong to threaten an innocent child. Wrong to believe that wealth and power were worth the moral compromises I made to obtain them." He looked around the comfortable room with its evidence of a life well lived. "You and Mr. Winters have built something authentic here, something that will outlast you both." The unexpected insight from this once arrogant man surprised Eleanor. "We've tried to create something meaningful," she acknowledged. "Something based on fairness and mutual respect rather than exploitation." "You've succeeded," Charles said with surprising humility. "I built an empire that collapsed at the first. Real challenge because it was founded on corruption. You've built a legacy that will endure because it's rooted in something stronger than greed." As their strange guests departed an hour later, Eleanor and Gabriel stood on the porch with Charlotte. Between them and James in his father's arms, the unlikely visit had provided closure to a chapter of their lives that had shaped them profoundly, but no longer held power over their future. "Will they come back?" Charlotte asked, watching the riders disappear down the road toward town. "I don't think so, sweetheart," Eleanor replied honestly. "Mr. Henderson is very ill. But you'll have the journal and the locket to remember your first father by." Charlotte nodded, processing this information with the directness of childhood. "I'm glad he's not mean anymore," she said finally. "And I'm glad Papa found us in the cave so we could all be a family." The simple wisdom of her daughter's observation made Eleanor smile. From the mouth of a child, the recognition that paths once divergent could ultimately lead to healing and wholeness, that even the most broken stories could find redemption. As they turned back toward the house, the home they had built together from the ashes of past tragedies, Eleanor felt the weight of old fears finally lift completely from her shoulders. The cave that had sheltered her in her darkest hour had led, through a winding and unexpected path, to this moment of completion and grace. "What shall we do with the rest of this beautiful day?" Gabriel asked, his arm settling comfortably around Eleanor's waist. Eleanor looked at her family, the daughter born of her first love and desperate courage, the son who carried Gabriel's strength and steadfastness, the husband who had seen her value when she had nothing to offer but determination, and the unborn child who represented their continuing journey together. "Live it fully," she answered simply, "as we've learned to do, one precious moment at a time." The mountain peaks that had once seemed so threatening now stood as familiar guardians on the horizon, witnesses to a story of survival transformed into a testament of thriving. The cave that had once been Eleanor's desperate refuge had become merely a chapter in a much larger and more beautiful narrative, one of courage, resilience, and the remarkable capacity of the human spirit to build something magnificent from the humblest beginnings. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.